I'm Sarah McCann, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association's Director of Communications, and welcome to our 2019 State of the Industry Press Conference. Thank you so much for joining us today, especially with the weather. We're really glad you made it and made it safely. And to kick things off, I'm going to introduce to the podium GAMA's Chairman and Gulfstream Aerospace Corporation President, Mark Burns.
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure being here. In Savannah, we would have rolled over this morning and not ventured out into the snow. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to represent our industry. Many of the members of GAMA are here today joining us, so I appreciate and respect the honor to be here. After we go through the numbers in just a moment, Pete's going to come up and give a few remarks, and then we're going to go through a panel discussion and give everybody an opportunity at the end to ask any questions that you may have. 2018 was a good year for business aviation. I'll share the numbers and I'll go through it in the order that we've used in the past. The Piston airplane shipments in 2018 were 1,139 Piston airplanes, up 5% year over year. If you look at the billings for this segment, because of the increased performance of these airplanes and the sophisticated nature of the systems on the airplanes, billings were up to $866 million in 2018. If you look at the geographic breakdown of the Piston airplane market, North America continues to be the largest portion of those shipments, though you see tremendous growth in Asia Pacific, up to 18.5% in 2018, so significant growth outside of the U.S. market. If we turn to turboprop shipments, slightly improved year over year at 601 units shipped, up 5.2%. If you look at the chart, and it may be a little bit hard to distinguish, but the darker blue area is a contribution of the agricultural sector. If you look at billings overall for the turboprop market, $1.8 billion in 2018, an increase of almost 20%, so significant growth. As we turn to market share, for the first time, North America is a little bit less than 50%. That's a significant shift in the marketplace. As turboprop airplanes become more sophisticated and the utility is seen throughout the world, that market continues to grow, most notably in Asia Pacific, but interesting also in the Middle East and Africa as well, year over year between 17 and 18, a large number of shipments. Turning to a little closer to home for me, business aviation jets. I think the year that I started in the early 80s, Gulfstream built 12 airplanes. We were hoping we might sell most of them by the end of the year. So the market has changed dramatically in that 36 years for me. Business aviation shipments in 2018 were up nearly 5% at 703 units. A lot of that has to do with new introductions of products into our industry. It's a number of different certifications of new airplanes, and it speaks to the importance of one of the most important issues we've talked about over the last few years, and that's the certification process that our industry is part of. It also speaks to innovation, the importance for our industry to continue to innovate throughout the segment, light jets, mid jets, large jets, but that innovation has allowed the significant growth that we've seen. Turning to specifics of the segments, to look at the various segments. The largest airplanes continue to be somewhat flat. Mid-size and light airplanes continue to grow and saw positive results throughout 2018. I think as we look into 19, there are a large number of newly or soon-to-be certified large cabin airplanes that will continue to push the strength of this jet segment. Turning to billing for the area, almost $18 billion in sales in 2018, about level with where we were in 17. If you look at the geographic market share, 65% here in the U.S. That's a significant number. It speaks highly of the strong economy that we have here in the U.S., but it also talks about the opportunity that exists as we move around the rest of the world. Turning to piston rotorcraft, shipments were strengthened for the second year in a row to 264 units and sales worldwide of $126 million. Turbine rotorcraft shipments and billing up for the second year in a row to 695 units, or a 5% growth, with billing up slightly to $3.5 billion. If you try to take that and make an apples to apples, I know it's a little bit hard to see on the chart, but you can see the dark blue area. That's the Leonardo preliminary numbers. They've been removed in 18 to kind of give you an apples to apples comparison. So to conclude with the numbers, we'll talk a little bit about avionics. GAMA represents a number of avionics manufacturers in our association, as well as our sister association, the Aircraft Electronics Association. And I believe President Mike Adamson's here today to talk with us as well. They do a survey each and every year, the association does, and it looks at the avionics manufacturer emphasis around the world. You can see a couple of things stand out. $2.7 billion of sales, and 57% of that in the retrofit market, all significant contributions to our business aviation segment. So now that we've gotten through the numbers, I will ask Pete to come to the stage and make a few opening remarks as well. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been an interesting start to the year, other than the fact that the commute was great this morning. We started off this year in a shutdown. And when you look at a partial government shutdown and you look at the effects that it did have on the industry, but then you say what could have been. Now, we have been up here for the last pretty much decade talking about the importance of the delegated authorities that we get through this thing called Organizational Designation Authorization, ODA. And I'm here to tell you that without it, this industry would have been dead in the water. It would have stopped us cold. But because we have worked this hard with our partners and especially our partners at the FAA, but also our partners up on Capitol Hill, to be able to make it important to this nation to be able to go and move it forward, we were able to work our way through the shutdown. Now, that didn't mean that it was not painful. But I have to tell you, I will be the first to acknowledge that we as an industry could not have got better support out of the FAA leadership and Dan Elwell, Ali Barami, Terry Bristol over at the Flight Standards side, and all of the folks that work in leadership at the FAA. This kind of shows you this slide, just the timeline, and we had a lot of back and forth going between our company experts that the FAA allowed us to feed to them, and after the first initial portion of the shutdown was over and it looked like it was going to go on longer, within the limits of the law, the FAA leadership brought back all those that they could to be able to go and try to address our concerns. And so the lines of communication were open, and then as the shutdown ended, we were able to give our suggestions for prioritization to be able to get us back on the step quickly. So I have to tell you that unless we had delegated authorities, it would have been devastating, but we were able to manage through it because of the support and the cooperation and the partnership we have with our aviation safety folks at the FAA. And then I would be very remiss not to mention that those experts that we rely on at the FAA to do our safety oversight that missed 2 paychecks, along with their brethren in the controller workforce, we owe them a debt of gratitude because there was no excuse, and I had an opportunity to testify a couple weeks ago in front of the House Aviation Subcommittee, and to a person, Republican or Democrat, they said that was a failure on their part to be able to go and keep the government functioning. But those that took the oath of office and worked for the government stayed in there, they hung in there, missed 2 paychecks, and still did their jobs. And so we do owe them a great debt of gratitude. Next slide, please. One of the things that's very important to us as an industry is to finish the task of getting the fleet equipped with ADS-B. So we all know the mandate now, we're within inside a year. So want to just take a snapshot and take a look at how we're going. You saw this slide last year, and if we look at basically where we're looking at the fleet and we're looking at where people fly, we think we're doing okay on the Piston side of the house. So about 50% of the fleet is equipped, and their equipage rates right now for Piston aircraft are about 1,000 aircraft a month. So will we have the majority of the fleet equipped? Well, we'll be over 50%. But if you look at the people that need to fly in the airspace and then look historically at what we did when we required transponders in certain airspace, we're tracking very well there. So there will be people that will still equip after the mandate goes into effect, but we think on the Piston side we're doing well. Last year we had some, we were thinking on turboprops we're doing well, that's sitting in the green, but our concern really was on the business jet side, would we make it? And as we've done with the help of our GAMA membership and our operator community to really do a deep dive into the aircraft that are actually flying in this system and being operated now versus just registered, we've been able to assess the fact that we're sitting there for business jets at about 63% of the fleet equipped now. But with the business jet equipage rate at about 500 aircraft a month, we're going to be in good shape by the end of the year. So we're going to dive into that a little bit when we get into the panel discussion with Dave Paddock. But we think on the business jet side, we're doing well as well in turboprops. We as a community still have a concern over rotorcraft aircraft. So on the rotorcraft side, it's about 30% of the active fleet is equipped, and their equipage rate is about 100 rotorcraft per month. So for those aircraft to be able to meet the mandate for those machines that need to fly within the veiled airspace of the ADS-B requirement, we still have some concerns. We have the Helicopter Association Convention coming up in Atlanta in April, and we're going to be working very hard with HAI to be able to address that and try to get our operators to get their appointments made in the shops to be able to get equipped. Next topic is something that I'm very proud to be able to talk about, and that's our initiative as an industry towards sustainable alternative jet fuel. Now, those of you that paid attention last summer or last May at EBASE, all of the OEMs came together with all of the operator associations and made our declaration that this fuel is safe to be able to put in any turbine aircraft that is out there. So the next step in the process was to go walk the walk and to be able to actually fly these aircraft. So in January at Van Nuys, Bombardier brought a Challenger 350 in using their stocks from Montreal. Mark's team from Gulfstream brought a G280 in from there using their SAJF stocks out of Savannah. And Michael Malafitano from Embraer brought a Legacy 500 in. But one thing we learned in that process is he wasn't able to find a fuel on the East Coast to fly it into Van Nuys. He was able to fuel and use the fuel at Van Nuys. And what does that tell us? That it's up to us as an industry to be able to figure out how to build that demand so we can start getting the supply we need to be able to start using this fuel. If we do not do this, we will not meet the mandates that we have out there for our environmental sustainability and our carbon neutral growth. And why is that important? Now, business aviation, about 7% of the emissions that are out there in the whole network. But if you look at recent reports out of Europe, there is a lot of attention being paid to this sector. Also, if you read in the newspaper about some of the environmental initiatives that just came forward here in the U.S. Congress, a lot of attention paid to aviation and the emission content there. It is imperative for us as an industry to move forward with this initiative. And so we were able, next slide, to get the leaders together in the community David Khalil from Bombardier runs our environmental committee. We had all of the associations represented along with city officials. One thing that we learned is that incentives that were offered by the state of California are something that allows more fuel to be available. So, and we have to rely on our commercial brethren because obviously we dwarf in comparison to the amount of fuel that they use, but they have those stocks available at LAX. So our next step in this process is as we move toward EBASE here in May, again in Geneva, is we as a community will be demonstrating our ability to find that fuel in Europe and to fuel aircraft and bring in to again try to build that notion that we have to increase demand that then the supply chain will follow to be able to provide this vital fuel to us. So I'm proud of our environmental efforts there, but we need to double down on what we're going to do to be able to meet our commitments. Next slide. So let's talk a second about another corollary to our environmental footprint, and that's where we're going with this new revolution in aviation, which is electric and hybrid propulsion. Our GAMA board had the foresight in 2015 to say, go forward, corral the organizations that are working very hard on trying to figure out how to do this, what we call on-demand air mobility. Some people call them air taxis, all different kinds of names out there. But we wanted to get this core group together that were looking into this and say, start working together like the rest of the GAMA membership does for the common good of developing this industry. Well, lo and behold, if you look at the next slide, that committee of 11 is now 79 companies worldwide that are looking at where this new revolution in aviation is going. And I think that there is a consensus among all of us that this is as important to aviation as the dawn of the jet age. So it is a global effort. We were just with a very high-level team of FAA regulators this morning talking about this to facilitate this industry that is here now. We are talking about actually certifying vehicles now and establishing certification basis. A lot of people thought this wasn't going to happen until well into the 2020s. It's happening now. So it's here. There's money behind it. It's exciting, and I don't know if some of you saw Morgan Stanley, I think, put out the press release that it was a $1.45 trillion business out there. That's a trillion. So big industry. So we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish so far, and really this is one of the most exciting parts of aviation that has happened in my career. So please follow that closely. Next slide. As always, we like to talk about the industry giving back. And another thing that I am so proud of this industry for is what we do within our communities. And whether you're talking about Gulfstream, GE Aviation, GE Honda Aero, as you go through the slide there, Pratt & Whitney Canada, Aviall, JSSI, FlightAware, all of the programs that they have, not only helping the community, disadvantaging the community, but also with their STEM programs and with their apprentice programs to be able to bring young people into this industry and get excited about it is something that we can be very proud of. Workforce development is extremely important to us, and you'll see a video here in a second where we'll talk about where GAMA is going. But in addition to those giving back in their local communities, we have aviation, general aviation organizations that are really playing a key role. We like to always emphasize what Corporate Angel Network does for us. We have 3,000 missions that were flown for cancer patients. And if you look at the Fortune 100 companies in the United States, over 50% of them are a part of this very valuable program that's providing great airlift to folks in need. Veterans Airlift Command, they flew 1,578 passengers last year, and the in-kind contribution from those flying those aircraft free of charge to those needing veterans is $3.3 million. So a lot of effort going in there, but it didn't stop. If you look at in the lower left quadrant, Operation Airdrop, played a vital role in the Hurricane Michael relief in the Florida Panhandle, using all different kinds of aircraft. There you see the Cub Scouts loading up a tail dragger to be able to take down some supplies there. And then, and that's Aerobridge, I'm sorry. And then Operation Airdrop was in North Carolina, working the floods that resulted from the earlier hurricane last year. So GA is continually giving back, and we all need to be very proud of that. Okay, now let's turn specifically to workforce. You've seen these slides. Boeing has done us all a great service by being able to give us a prediction of the number of pilots and the number of technical specialists we need worldwide to recapitalize this workforce. But it's not only recapitalization. It is growing to meet this pace of activity that is just accelerating all the time. I talked about this new technology, but one thing we learned this morning is our OEMs, our airframe OEMs, are from a clean sheet design to actually type certificate is a much faster process than it might have been in years previous. So pace of activity is going faster, and even with additive manufacturing and other techniques out there, we need to develop this workforce. Now, on the pilot side, the good news is wages are rising rapidly. In fact, we all know we have a pilot shortage, and there's a lot of work being done to be able to go and feed that supply, and our sister associations are doing a great job trying to address that, and it's brought the aviation community together. So the airlines are partnering with programs such as the ones that AOPA have put out to be able to get young people in the door to be able to do the training. For us as manufacturers and maintenance organizations, the technician side of the house is extremely important, and we are in a competition for that workforce. So our efforts have been, we need to communicate with young people, we need to communicate with parents to tell them, you have a great job in this industry, and it's an exciting job. It's not working on the factory floor, just putting a widget on a production line like you'd think in an old automotive plant. It is a dynamic, exciting career field, and you get to do things that many people couldn't even imagine doing before, using computer-assisted technology to do things virtually and then actually produce the part. So those of you that were at NBA saw the first in our series of videos. I'm going to show you the fourth in our series of videos that we've been putting out monthly. And so take a look at how we're trying to communicate with this younger generation about the jobs that are available in our industry. Lonnie, if you could roll that.
You can't help but get to know the people you work with.
You can only help but to get to know people.
The people are my favorite part. We all work closely with each other.
Everyone's always together, seeing something through, seeing a beautiful project through in the end.
Our team has got everything from computer science majors, we've got electrical engineering, we've got mechanical engineering, aerospace, systems engineering, industrial engineering.
We have a good mix of experienced and inexperienced individuals.
Almost any field applies.
Everybody knows everybody working across the teams.
We look at not just current skills, but the ability and the potential of individuals to be able to take on other skills.
And that diversity actually allows a team to function at a higher level.
It's not like you have a co-worker, you have a friend.
You've done something together, you work together, you accomplish something together, and it just gives you a sense of, I know you, I know what you can do.
It's a close-knit group of people that makes it so much more personal.
It's neat to have that kind of relationship with your coworkers.
Working with people and seeing everyone succeed.
It's a bunch of passionate people all working towards a common goal.
That's how I feel about the people in this industry.
These guys are very, very committed, very passionate, and very talented.
It's more of a family dynamic.
Sometimes it feels like family.
I value family.
It's not just a job, but it's also a family.
We really feel like a family here.
Just one big family.
I used to love flying. Now I like flying, but I really love working with other people.
That's what makes it so exciting and so interesting.
I like that.
So it's our job to get this message out to educators, to school superintendents, and to parents, to be able to let them know that young people have this opportunity. Young men, and especially an untapped resource by and large for this industry of ladies, to be able to bring them into this profession is something that is out there, it's exciting, and I want to take kind of bring that view in here to the Washington, D.C. area. We have a program out of the University of District of Columbia that's executed over here at Ronald Reagan Airport. Very few people know about it. They work on a shoestring budget. In fact, they're not even allowed to advertise because of some rules that they have out there. And yet, Bill Russo, who is the director. Bill, can you raise your hand? Right over here. So Bill, being the entrepreneurial spirit he is of being able to say, how can I stimulate people that work in the young people in the District of Columbia to come to my program? In just a few short years, he has a program built up, and he's got now 44 students enrolled. And of those 44 students, about 23 of them, I think, are first year and 20 second year. But let me tell you what he's been able to produce. So in a very short time, within 6 months of graduation, they have 100% pass rate on their general A&P test, on the aircraft or the mechanical part. Basically, on your A&P, you divide that up in airframe and power plant. On the airframe part, 100% pass rate. On the power plant side, 100% pass rate. Now, compare that to a national average, which is 20 percentage points lower than that. That's what they've been able to produce. But then, take those graduates, 100% placement rate into jobs in the aerospace sector. 100%. And many of these young people that graduate are making more in that entry-level job in our industry than their parents have made in the jobs that they've been doing for many years. So I know, Bill, you've got a bunch of your students, a number of your students with you today. Thank you very much for all you do, and I know that Boeing has given you a maintenance trainer and that, but we're going to support you in a very strong way because what you are doing, we'd like to see replicated around the country. And I'd like to, why don't you all stand up for a second so we can give you a hand. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to segue into our panel discussion, and we've used this format for the last several years to be able to just talk some of the industry issues. So I would ask my chairman, Mark Burns, the head of Gulfstream, to come up. We have our vice chair, Dave Paddock, who's in charge of jet aviation, all of the activities here in North America for jet aviation. William Mbofo from Boeing Global Services, who's in charge of all business and general aviation. And then last but certainly not least, Anna Dietrich, who is the co-founder of Terrafugia. And she has been on the talking circuit many times here lately. So if I could get you all to sit down here. And when we get to the Q&A, I'd like to remind you that since this is webcasted, please wait until you get the microphone in your hand so those on the webcast can hear the question and also identify yourself when you ask. Okay, are our mics on? Okay. I thought the first thing we do is let's just talk about the state of the industry. The numbers, you know, this is the first time I think since 2011 that every segment that we're reporting on is up. And Mark, from your perspective, how are you looking at the health of the industry?
You know, I think 2018 was a good year for us. The U.S. economy, the strength here at home was certainly a factor. Starting to see some growth again as the economy turns in Europe. Certainly some of the tensions around the world with trade and different geopolitical issues have caused a pause in some areas. But I will tell you, year over year, as we start 2019, I think we're in a stronger position than we saw at the beginning of last year.
William, can you give us the Boeing view?
Yeah, from a Boeing perspective, it was a phenomenal year. We had a lot of firsts in Boeing, you know, $100 billion threshold we crossed. We had record aircraft deliveries, won a number of programs on the defense side. So all in all, a great year. If we talk about the services business, which, you know, I'm a part of and run for business and general aviation, we forecasted a $2.8 trillion market over the next 20 years for services. And we've grown 17% year over year in our second year as Boeing Global Services. So that's pretty strong growth in our business year over year. As our customers have grown, we've grown with them. And in fact, we've outpaced the market as we've delivered new solutions and offerings to the market. So we're really excited about not only the present, but also the future for the industry.
Super. Anna, you're a new entrant into this world. I talked a little bit about the energy that's behind it. What are you feeling? What is your sentiment for what's happening?
So new and not so new. So Terrafugia incorporated in 2006, trying to do something in the light sport market. And I have just been blown away at how that initial push on doing something different, thinking outside the box in aviation, has bloomed into this new industry that we're seeing with eVTOL and urban air mobility. There's incredible energy, there's incredible innovation. It's driving investment, it's driving people to think about how aviation might apply to their personal lives in ways that I haven't seen before. I think it's very exciting.
And Dave, if you look at the MRO side of the house, and also, obviously, Jet Aviation is a great operator in the system, doing a lot of completion. So that part of aviation that plays such a vital role in fixing aircraft, getting them in the air, but also completing them for business purposes, how are we doing there?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Pete, we're predominantly on the services side. So we have FBOs, we have aircraft management, charter staffing. I'd say we're cautiously optimistic from an industry perspective. We're hearing from our customers continued interest in buying airplanes. Our number of aircraft under management grew the largest last year for Jet Aviation than in any year past. We're investing in hangars in the US and beyond. We're investing in regional growth. We acquired Hawker Pacific last year, which was a significant expansion for us. As we stand today, we're 4,500 people in 20 countries. So as we look across the world, we, like other industries, I think, are monitoring trends, what's happening in the stock market, what's happening with trade talks and those types of things, but we're cautiously optimistic.
That's great. Every time I call you, you're going out to see a new hangar project.
Yeah.
You've been busy. Turning back here to the U.S., we worked very hard over the course of several years to get the last reauthorization to happen. And fortunately for us as an industry, it did pass in the last Congress. And it's a 5-year reauthorization. But one of the things that is our lifeblood is the certification piece of that. And Mark, you've been a player in this for many years of trying to be able to drive with the FAA the improvements that we need to see there. If you look at the FAA reauthorization bill and what's in it, what can we capitalize on as an industry?
You know, the G600 will be the 11th airplane that I've been part of certifying, and the process has become very complex through the years. I think the bill gives us something maybe we hadn't had before, and that's an accountability on all levels, both industry and the FAA, to make some improvement. I think we're at a point where reimagining how airplanes are certified is certainly something that's possible. You talked about our meeting today. Several of us had a chance to meet with the leadership of the FAA, and you know, I believe we all have the same goal now, and I think this bill gives us an opportunity to focus on making a difference, taking advantage of the technologies that have evolved, not only in airplanes and systems, but in how we simulate and prepare for flight. You know, on the G500, we flew almost 40,000 simulated hours before we ever lifted off for the first time, and that brings a level of maturity to airplanes that we've never seen before. And the things that we have at our disposal now, if both industry and the FAA take advantage of those tools, I think we're really going to make a difference in the future of aviation, all of aviation. And I think the bill now puts a level of accountability on all of us to perform.
Dave, in that same bill, you know, we tend to focus a lot on certification, but then all of a sudden we get to the flight standards side of the FAA safety chain, and there's some themes that have been addressed in the bill. From your perspective, looking at the flight standards reforms that were in the bill, how important is that, and how do you think we can capitalize on the words in the bill?
So I think anything, generally speaking, that improves consistency and safety, we support, I think, as an industry and as Jet Aviation particularly. We've seen a number of positive changes recently within the Flight Standards organization, the FSDO organization. We currently have 8 operating certificates around the world. So we interact with both FAA and non-FAA other national aviation authorities. And we are supportive and we're seeing positive change, but consistency is the key word. As we look across these various entities, we need consistency so we can operate and we can support our customers' requirements.
And William, in the bill itself, there was talk of a grant program to establish pilot and maintenance technicians for our industry, all of aerospace. Mm-hmm. And Boeing has given us the wake-up call as an industry and said, hey, we got to pay a lot of attention to it because there's increased demand. Can you talk about the Boeing strategy to be able to not only leverage that language, but also how we as a nation and beyond a nation, how we as a planet can focus on working this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Pete. I think working with the folks at GAMA and legislation, we're really excited about that portion making its way into the bill. For pilots, the shortage is real. We've talked about that extensively, but also mechanics, right? So when we think about changing the paradigm in this country, and you talked about a little earlier about putting the widgets on. Mechanics, the technology surrounding that has increased hundreds of fold in the last 25 years. We talk about augmented reality, composite technology, data analytics. So for us at Boeing, we really are focused on early outreach, focusing on that high school level students, men and women, to help them, shift the paradigm and how they think about, aerospace and aviation as a livelihood. And it's a good thing to say, hey, there's a shortage. So it's a classic supply and demand. So we're putting a lot of our energies focused on STEM, in particular at the local levels. Early outreach is really fundamental to how we're trying to get after this issue that we all are facing as an industry. We're working with AOPA and their symposiums. We're the chair sponsor of that, and we've seen a lot of success. We're hoping to have some of those students come work for us at Boeing, but we know there's a greater need in the industry that we feel good about helping solve for.
And as we drill down into that, in the words that are in the bill a little bit further, there's statements specifically about the Youth Access to American Jobs in Aviation Task Force and also the Women in Aviation Advisory Board. We all saw at the State of the Union address, we have more female members of Congress, we have more young people in Congress, so I think it's a winning formula for us as an industry to be able to communicate with them, support for these initiatives. Can you give us perspectives on that?
I think any effort that works to bring in fresh perspectives into the industry, that works to inspire young people to try something new and to not be afraid to try something that's hard is welcome. And I know certainly having more women in the industry is something that I'm heartily in favor of. We were talking earlier that the program that you were mentioning has about a 7% enrollment rate for women in that A&P program, and that is good for the industry, but I think it underscores how much room for improvement there is overall. I would say that it's very easy to focus on the STEM and the recruitment. And it's much easier to kind of forget about the retention side of the equation, and I think that's equally important as we look to the future. We're going to bring in this great parcel of young people, hopefully many of which are women, and then by the time they're my age, only about 20% of them will still be working in an engineering field. So that's something that we need to address with some broader structural changes that are probably outside the scope of the aviation industry, but I think really speak to being inclusive in all ways, not just in the recruitment side.
Well, I mentioned the partial government shutdown, and as we were dealing with I term a chocolate mess over here, we have our friends over in the UK and in the EU dealing with another chocolate mess called Brexit. And Mark, I know that your experts that are over there at Luton and some of the other facilities that you have been doing the best they can to prepare for this, where we really don't know what comes next. Can you talk about your perspectives on potential impact of Brexit?
Right. I've spent quite a bit of time in Europe over the last few months, and the Brexit talk has definitely made us start preparing for the worst, hope for the best, and plan for what could be a hard Brexit. We have a fairly large contingent in the UK at Luton and soon to be at Farnborough, as well as in a design center in London. So preparing for the worst for us means that we'll have to utilize outside opportunities to certify and return airplanes to service. We can do that through Jet Aviation or Gulfstream's interest in the EU or even the US, which will be certainly more costly for us. We would hope that a softer Brexit would be the answer. It does appear that with the current discussion, it may get kicked down the road a little further. But certainly it requires anybody that is in the UK to start planning for a hard Brexit event that could add cost to our business and ultimately could have an impact on future decisions. But it is something we're preparing for.
And Dave, since Jet is headquartered in Basel, so on continental Europe, what are your perspectives from a standpoint of Jet and maintenance organizations in general?
So right now, I mean, we're focused on this extensively. We have a number of UK nationals working in our European facilities. They hold pilot licenses, they hold engineering licenses. They might be resident and working in Switzerland, but they're directly impacted even though they're not in the UK. And the UK is one of the top 10 countries with business jets in the world. It has the potential to create a significant impact. So we're bracing for something to happen. We don't know what exactly will happen, and I think that's the concern. We get closer to this end date without a lot of clarity from here to there.
We're an industry that likes certainty. You know, when we have a path forward, we can go and work it. When we have this uncertainty out there, it is debilitating. And so, again, as Mark said, we're trying to prep all of our member companies to look at the opportunities. And I will say that EASA has worked very closely with us to be able to allow us to do as much as we can to prep for that worst case, to do some third country type of planning so that we can continue maintenance back and forth between continental Europe and the UK. The actual bilateral agreements that predated the European Union that basically were established between the US and the UK are something we will be able to fall back on. But unfortunately, there was no EU at the time to create an independent agreement with the UK, so those things have to be reinvented. So it will be tough, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail and we'll have an accommodation there. Anna, I talked about this new area of when we talk about electric vertical takeoff and landing, when we talk about on-demand air mobility. I mentioned at the hearing the other day that, you know, it's just not urban centers, because our hope is that every small town, every village across the planet can have something sitting in the local fire station, volunteer fire station that's programmed, and it's charged up, and it can go to a hospital when we need it to do that. So, you know, the benefit to mankind is tremendous. I talked about the pace and how it's surprised people at how rapid it's going. You are right in the middle of this. Can you give us some idea of your sense of timing and challenges out there as we work with these different authorities to try to bring this to reality?
Well, Pete, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, the time is now. Like, there are very credible players in this space that are at a point in their aircraft development projects where we need some level of certainty, we need some level of direction. I think there is a good consensus that the Part 23 that was rewritten recently is a very solid basis from which to build on a certification plan for these aircraft. But that's just one piece. There's the operations, there's the pilot training, there's how do we incorporate simplified vehicle operations and autonomy and automation into these aircraft. There's huge potential for not just increasing connectivity and transportation, which are huge, but also increasing safety, democratizing personal air travel. The potential benefits of this space are quite large. And we need to be playing the long game and working towards solutions that will be durable and expandable. But we also need to be getting responsiveness and clarity and direction today that we can start on this sort of crawl, walk, run approach that will get us to market and to start learning these valuable lessons and to start bringing this value to our communities as soon as possible.
And William, we were all excited to see Boeing's test article in this exciting field just fly about 3 weeks ago, right out here at Manassas with the company that you guys own with Aurora Flight Sciences. Can you talk about Boeing's commitment to this new area of aviation?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, we acquired Aurora last year, and they're playing an instrumental role in helping to accelerate our journey. And it's just that. It's been a journey for us, and we're really excited about that first demonstration that we flew. It was pretty exciting for us. But if you look at it more holistically, last year within Boeing, we launched Boeing Next. And Boeing Next is really focused on defining the ecosystem to support this industry, focusing on urban, regional, global mobility, and making sure that we can have a more robust ecosystem where both autonomous and piloted air traffic can coexist in a safe way. So we've doubled down, so to speak, not only through our acquisitions, but with our focus and giving the small cadre of folks within Boeing Next to put a focus on that and helping to define the future. So that's what we're doing within the Boeing company to support this.
Oh, that's exciting. We could talk for hours.
We can.
About this area. It's great. I had touched on the equipage mandates that are out there, and I focused just on ADS-B, but of course we have fans to be able to cross the Atlantic now. We have emerging mandates, also ADS-B mandates from other countries out there, Canada being one of them for nationwide. David, as you look at the pace of activity and what you're seeing out there not only in the jet facilities, but also with your own fleet of aircraft that you manage, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we manage 270 aircraft currently, and 80 to 90% of those aircraft are already ADS-B equipped. By the end of the year, 100% of those aircraft will be ADS-B equipped. What we're seeing in our service facilities is an increase in interest, an increase in work, and I think if there's any caution, it's those that aren't yet equipped. I mean, I was happy to see your 60 to 65% number referenced. What are we going to do in that 35% in the remaining 12 months or 11 months of this year to get that full capability? So we have capability and capacity today. In the third quarter, fourth quarter of this year, I can't say whether we'll have that available capacity to meet that January 2020 deadline. And I will say from a personal perspective as well, I think I'm a pilot. I had the opportunity to install ADS-B in and out, and I'm at 182. It offers so much capability today relative to what we had a year or two ago. So the enhancements on safety are demonstrable. It's an investment, but it's an investment that is far worth it. I mean, a very high return on investment is probably the best way to put it.
Absolutely. The situational awareness we gain out there, and actually have a vector stick, you can tell which direction they're going. You see the call sign up there. You can understand who the controller is talking to. Just the picture you can build in your mind and looking at that display is just phenomenal, and it is a quantum leap in safety. William, another area that Datacom, and you touched on it, but with this fans mandate, we're starting to get further and further in Datacom. But also the exciting thing is, prior to the partial government shutdown, we were getting ready to start the next phase, which is en route Datacom. We've been doing it at the actual airfields themselves, being able to pass back and forth, basically text type of information on clearances and everything. But now we're on the cusp of being able to do this en route, and it's going to be a little delayed. Some of the contracts delayed due to the partial government shutdown, but we're in a brave new world, and of course Boeing is playing a key role in that. Can you talk about the concept of how we as a civil aviation industry are going to go forward with this type of Datacom type of technology?
Yeah, it's the customers are demanding it, and I think this on-demand nature is just kind of how we operate in our personal lives, and we're seeing that kind of translate into our industry as well. So within Boeing, we're offering service kits and looking at modification of some of our aircraft, in particular in the BA space, to help accelerate that. I know, Dave, you talked about capacity. You know, we're at capacity as well, right? So we're starting to lean on some of our third-party customers to help with the acceleration of that as well. But you know, it's moving along at a pretty fast clip, Pete. And you know, to your point about being able to have en route translation and just the whole air-to-ground communication in a more efficient way is something that we're focusing on, and it's happening in a real way and pretty quickly.
The last topic I want to touch on it is just looking again at this workforce, because it's such an important thing to our industry. And Mark, I know when I've been in your facility and I'm seeing the robotic riveting and just the pace of technology out there, but we all know that our workforce is aging. So what is Gulfstream doing, not only in the Savannah plant, but around to be able to address the issue? You know, how do we get here and how do we get out of it to be able to grow this workforce for the future?
Yeah, we're a product of our own success, right? I mean, we've grown so tremendously over the last 30 years. And to your point, you know, airplanes were largely hand-built 30 years ago. And today, the precision and the equipment that we have at our disposal, robotics and different additive manufacturing that we've added, requires a reskilling of our workforce. So we not only have something we've created called Gulfstream University to reskill our workforce, which has grown from about 1,000 people when I started to almost 20,000 today, making sure that they're prepared for the future. And much like William pointed out, you know, it really becomes the onus is on us as an industry to take a leadership role and making sure that the educational opportunities to learn about aviation. We have several student leadership programs throughout all the cities where we are around the U.S. We've started as early as early childhood education now to teach about STEM and make sure that they understand coding and things of that nature. This is about a commitment and a long-term commitment to make sure that you're training the workforce of the future, but also have a commitment to reskill the people that have made us so successful.
Dave, what about jet aviation?
Yeah, a lot of the same themes. I mean, we have a stated internal objective of being an employer of choice, so we want to go and bring people on board, not only bring them on board, but give them fulfilling careers and retain them for their entire career. It's easier and better for us to do that than have them go on to another job and have to backfill that position. And last year, I think we hired in excess of 500 people worldwide. About half of those were in technically skilled positions, whether they be engineers or pilots, cabin attendants, maintenance technicians. But the opportunity is there across the board, whether you work in our finance department or our human resources department, or you work on the shop floor. This is something that we're trying to encourage people in. So we, like some of the other panelists here, support STEM initiatives, work with other trade organizations, look at high school programs, university programs. We were fortunate enough to win one of our Basel interns was sort of the Switzerland version of, Switzerland's Got Talent. He won the intern of the year for Switzerland. And we're proud of those accomplishments. So the more we can do to promote it, aviation as a career choice, not just a job, but a career choice, I think benefits us all.
You know, you touched on it during your remarks, but incredibly collaborative industry aviation is. And I think there's a huge commitment from all of us to give back to the workforce of the future. And I see it everywhere I go with aviation companies, the commitment to training that workforce.
William, Boeing, I remember going with you up at AirVenture, and we walked into this above and beyond pavilion. The thing was giant. And there were kids working on, I mean, they were flying, they were learning about aerodynamics by having their own wings out there and seeing what the computer was showing them. I mentioned that you guys have given a state-of-the-art maintenance trainer to this great program here at UDC, but how are you seeing the receptivity as that pavilion moves around not only the U.S., but around parts of the world? You've got several of them out there for folks wanting to be in this industry?
It's been received very well, Pete. And in fact, we've used that as a model. You know, we've gotten pulled even within Boeing to say, hey, how do we take this model and apply it to other areas as we look at general outreach across what we're doing from an early outreach perspective. So it's got legs, it's got a lot of good feedback, and we're just happy to be able to invest right now. You know, we're on this investment curve not only for our products, but given some of the recent, you know, tax benefits that we've received as a company, we're taking an opportunity to invest back into the communities in which we live and work, and also helping to solve for this industry challenge of reskilling, upskilling, and getting the next generation of aviation enthusiasts, you know, prepared for the future.
Anna, you know, 50 years ago we landed the first person on the moon, and we had all of that energy going toward the space program and pushing the boundaries of manned flight with air-breathing vehicles. And, you know, you founded Terrafugia back now over a decade ago, but you're together there with really smart people at MIT, and you all got together and said, let's launch this flying car concept. But is that going to be a hook for getting engineers and that caliber of people? Are we going to be able to re-excite the imagination of aerospace with this new type of era we're going into?
I think so. I think having a common vision that a lot of people can buy into and get excited about the future. I mean, we're making all of our science fiction dreams come true in one form or another these days, and it's so it's inspiring for me, and it's inspiring for me to be able to bring an opportunity to, you know, to college students and to students. One of the things that Terrafugia does is partner with universities for their internship programs that are for credit. So to provide an educational experience in addition to the experience of working in a company, and I'm sure everyone else up here does that as well. That's something that we've really enjoyed being part of, especially since we started the company fresh out of grad school ourselves. So having that close connection back to the university environment has been great. And I think the idea of a moonshot, the idea of doing something that is fundamentally transformative. You mentioned that this is, you know, being on the cusp of the jet age, and that's an analogy that I've used elsewhere as well. And it sounds potentially like we're overstating, but I don't believe it is. I think we do have the potential to make that kind of an impact. And what we do today and the students that we inspire today are the ones that are going to carry that forward. And I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why I get on, why I use our last transportation revolution to show up to create the next one. So I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and I think it's something that we all have an obligation to sort of pay it forward to the next generation and leave them with a world that's even more exciting and even more capable than the one that we have today.
Well, I hope that all of you have sensed the optimism there. We are on a good roll. The numbers were good. There's so much we can do as an industry and working together, and that's what's so wonderful about being part of this association, is that every one of our members working together to be able to go and solve the problems so that people can bring technology to the market more quickly, and everything that we put out there is safer than the product we produced previously. So it's a great industry to be a part of, and I'd like for you all to join me in thanking our panel here today. So Sarah's got the mic there. Anybody like to ask any questions? Don't be bashful. Mr. Garvey has a question here, Sarah.
Sarah. Pete, on the alternate fuels that you raise a good point. I mean, you have to have it in the marketplace to use it. Right now, it's only, I think, only at LAX, right? And if the airlines aren't using it, I don't think business aviation can make a difference. It wouldn't make a dent, would it?
Well, so Mark has feedstocks there in Savannah that he's able to access. David's got some up in Montreal, but you're exactly right that where commercial airlines are going to use it is where we are going to be able to leverage off of, just because they use so much more of it. But that's why I feel good that we are hand in hand with them in the CAFE program, the Commercial Aviation Fuels Initiative, that is working to be able to go and partner with them and be able to see how we can build this demand, because they have set the same aspirational goals as we have. So we want carbon neutral growth as we move forward here. And the only way we can make it happen that we see now, we as manufacturers have done a great job in making aircraft more fuel efficient. That's on the commercial side, on the business general aviation side. But we also counted a lot on next gen and in Europe, single European skies. And what we have come up against is a populace around cities that doesn't necessarily want airplanes to fly over the exact same spot and that exact same house every single airplane. And so it puts those at Eurocontrol and those in the FAA in a conundrum. What are we going to do? Now we have this great ability to reduce emissions, and yet we've got populations around cities that don't like this new form of performance-based navigation. So as we wrestle with that, we have to rely on sustainable alternative jet fuel. We have no choice, because as you recall, up in Montreal, they will impose market-based measures that go on top. If we don't solve the problem ourselves, then we're going to be charged, and we don't know what form that is eventually going to take. So we are somewhat in control of our own destiny if we can get this going. But there isn't a forcing function, and you were with us at Van Nuys. I think the reason that it is available out there in California is that there is a subsidy or a credit that they give us to be able to use this fuel that encourages the fuel providers to be able to say, yes, we'll do it. I think if you go over to Europe, there's energy there. I mean, people care about this issue intensely, but we've got to figure out as a community how to build the demand that then the supply will respond to. So, but we are definitely at the mercy of the airlines in doing this.
Why do you think they've been so slow to adopt it? Is it money?
Well, I still think it's cost. It wouldn't have been so difficult before the drop in oil prices, because as you recall, there were a lot of initiatives going. In fact, DOD here in the US was buying a heck of a lot of the fuel, and all of a sudden now oil is cheap once again, which a lot of us benefit from, obviously, but the economic incentives for the alternative fuel are not as strong as they were before because oil is so cheap. And that price is starting to inch up now, and there'll be a crossover point at a certain point in time. We have a question right back here, sir.
Hi, Nick Zazuli, Avionics International. Question for Pete and Anna, probably. Anyone's welcome to weigh in, but you talked about the kind of certification process for the vehicles that'll be used in on-demand mobility, and trying to work with regulators to get that going and everything. But the other side of that is integration of those vehicles and their traffic into the NAS. Wondering if you can talk about kind of that process, where you understand it to be, and how the process and where it's going and that regulation impacts what you guys do.
Absolutely. Anna, why don't you start?
Sure. It's a great question. And one of the things that I try to do with the eVTOL committee here at GAMA is to keep track of all of those different pieces of the puzzle. I think where we're headed is to do a crawl, walk, run approach for that as well, where we start with airspace carve-outs similar to the GA corridors that are in use today, where within those carve-outs and those corridors, the on-demand aircraft that are traveling there can self-coordinate. And then air traffic control will keep other traffic out of that space. So that is a baby step. It is a point-to-point solution. It's not a general sort of everywhere you want to go solution. But also keep in mind that, as much as we are charging full steam ahead, this is going to be a gradual implementation. We're not going to start with 10,000 aircraft tomorrow. So we will work up to a larger volume, and as we go with that, we'll continue to reevaluate the status quo and the systems that are in place for traffic more generally. So between those two opportunities, I think we'll get there. I think back to when we first started having automobiles on the streets. We didn't have stop signs, we didn't have street lights, we didn't have yellow lines down the center of the road, right? So as these vehicles become more and more mainstream and more prevalent, If we continue the collaboration that we have with all parts of the FAA and with the air traffic controllers, I think we'll come up with solutions that are safe and efficient and beneficial for everybody. But it's definitely going to be a process, and we're trying to keep an eye on it now.
And I've had my opportunity to sit down with Terry Bristol, the head of the ATO at the FAA, along with Paul Rinaldi, the head of the air traffic controllers. And as we look at airspace, if you think of an urban area, and let's take a Class B airspace, Washington is not a good example because of all the security stuff, but take New York City or any other one, and you're thinking about that upside-down wedding cake. Well, in the center part is the urban center and everything, and as you have these aircraft flying over there, everything within that airspace has to be controlled anyway. So now you can build routes that as it goes out into the airspace and perhaps now operating underneath as the wedding cake starts to fan out and you're operating underneath, now you feed into those corridors that we developed, and we can do this. They are not worried about that type of operation. And then you think if we're going to use these vehicles to be able to go and transit, let's say, from a suburban pickup point to the airport itself, and we can go inside of the security envelope, so now we're starting to be able to relieve pressure on the TSA lines. But also, we operate day in and day out. Those of us that fly, we see helicopter traffic at airfields all the time. It happens. And one of the places, if you ever want to see an amazing operation take place, go to Sao Paulo down in Brazil and see the amount of helicopter traffic that is operating in an urban environment. They've had to meter it because there's so many helicopters out there, but they have figured out, one of our GAMA member companies has gone down there for an experiment and figured out they can make money, and they started changing what they could actually charge for on-demand mobility with a helicopter, which is much more expensive to operate than what we're talking about with these vehicles, and they figured out a way to make money at it. So we know that there is a model that'll work, and it can work in an urban area and mix with existing traffic that is in our hub airports. Anything else? Sir? Molly.
Hi, good afternoon. I was wondering if the panel members might be able to give some examples of what, if anything, how, if any ways you guys were affected by the shutdown, if you could give some examples.
So for us, one of the things that we had seen in previous shutdowns is the registry needed to stay open for us to deliver airplanes, and we were fortunate to have that. I think the protracted nature of the shutdown and the fact that it drug on definitely put us in just a backlog situation. We were preparing for certain CERT projects and deliveries that just kind of backlogged as the FAA was out. I'll tell you, they've worked through it very quickly for us, have been very efficient, supportive of everything we did while they were shut down. So it was more just day-to-day mechanics of the things that we do together. I think we learned a lot during the shutdown that we will bring forward to the FAA. The ODA, as Pete said, was invaluable to us to continue the business of certifying and delivering airplanes. So, but we learned a lot about what we didn't have and what the FAA was still involved in day to day. And there are some things that I believe we can improve on both sides.
Dave, you saw some stuff on the operator side.
Yeah, on the operating side, we had things, as an example, training plans that were in the Van Nuys FSDO for review. Ultimately, like you said, Mark, the FAA worked through it, even though they were technically shut down. They approved those training plans. And I said to Pete, I think if it went on another week or two, the impact would have been much more significant. So it created some minor pain that the FAA worked with us to get through that. But if it took another week or two of delay, it would have had probably double the impact on us and our operators.
And Molly, I'd say that our meeting with the FAA leadership this morning, we said we need to capture the lessons learned, because you don't know what you have until it's gone, but it's kind of the inverse, that we touch the FAA in too many places. We don't have to touch them if we properly exercise our delegated authority and then allow those resources that are freed up to work with companies that can't afford or haven't been at the financial point where they could set up their own ODA. And that was the whole idea, that if we work these processes right, and we were finding out that the FAA was involved way too much on just paperwork. Just basic routine paperwork, and we touch the FAA too many times in there, and if we, and the FAA is very willing to work with us on being able to take those lessons learned, feed it back into the system and say, okay, do we really need to be doing that? And so we've got great partners with the FAA to be able to take these lessons learned and do it better. And not for the potential of a next shutdown, but in day-to-day operations. Right. Anything else?
We do actually have one question. Maybe it can be the last of our day from Twitter, from the Par Avion Limited handle. To what extent does the training of pilots for the future need to take into account operation of pilotless aircraft?
Anna, you want to start with that one?
Sure.
Yeah, she could start and end with that one.
Yes, that is in my wheelhouse. I think that we would be foolish to not take that into account. I think it's a very good question, and I think that, again, speaking to the airspace integration, this isn't a switch that we're going to flip where all of a sudden one day everything's different, but it is an evolution and it is a process that has already started. A lot of the general public isn't aware of just how much is already automated on board an aircraft. We already help our pilots out significantly. And as we mature that technology and as we bring simplified vehicle operations and autonomy and automation and other complex systems on board smaller aircraft and have them be more visible, I think we're going to be dramatically increasing the safety and accessibility of those aircraft. And I think we need to be really training pilots to exercise the parts of being human that are so hard to replicate in a computer. The systems management, the critical thinking, the stick and rudder skills will probably be de-emphasized as we move forward, and that higher level thinking will probably become more and more important as we move along. So I think it's going to be a long time before you get on an aircraft and there isn't anybody in the cockpit at all, but I think the role of that person is going to evolve significantly sooner than maybe we realize, and more, and in many ways it already has started that process. So I think, yes, absolutely, keep it in mind, and I think working with all aspects of FAA is so important in that way, because the aircraft certification ties into the pilot training, ties into the operations, and all of these pieces have to be, all the puzzle pieces have to fit. So as we're certifying aircraft, what are the requirements on that hardware, given what that person that's going to be flying it is going to now be trained to do, and how is that different from today? So all of these pieces have to come together to pull this off. So I think it's great to be thinking about them.
And our EPIC committee has put a tremendous amount of brain power in this exercise we call the deconstructed pilot, to be able to bend the skills that a pilot does, and what can the machine do better today than the pilot. And Anna mentioned stick and rudder skills. There are navigation, obviously, the computer can do better, but there are some things like emergency evac, if you do have a problem, that the computer can't handle, because the computer can't predict what, in an emergency, how humans are going to react to that. So what I like to emphasize is that it's not unprecedented what we do with pilots today. So if we have an aircraft that's very sophisticated, and to fly it you need a different skill set than if you were flying conventional aircraft today, you may get a basic license, and then you get endorsements to be able to fly less sophisticated airplanes. Where do we have that today? Tail draggers. So to fly a 1920s or 1930s technology type of airplane with a tail dragger, it's tougher to do than a tricycle gear, and so you have to have an endorsement to say that you're qualified to do that. I don't think it's beyond reason in the not too distant future that to fly on steam gauges, you're going to have an endorsement, because everybody's flying with glass, and it's got a moving map display. You know where you are all the time. And so it takes a lot of skill to build the mental picture to know where you are in space if you don't have the technology that we've already built in. So there's precedent out there. So I think, as Anna said, we're going to walk before we run. There's going to be people in these aircraft, but what we train and the skills we train them to may change over time.
Can I add one piece to that? I think there's a paradigm shift that's happening on the automation side as well, which is up until this point in the automotive industry as well, the person has kind of been the fallback. So something goes wrong and it's, oh, here, you deal with it now. And that's really not using people to the best of their abilities, and it's kind of setting the human up for failure in many ways. So there's a shift that's happening now in how we think about certifying autonomous systems and how we think about integrating those into these aircraft, that gets away from that mentality and goes to fail-safe or fail-operational redundant systems where the pilot doesn't get sort of tossed as hot potato of, oh, now you're in trouble, deal with it. And I think that has a big implication for pilot training as well as for long-term safety of the fleet. So that's another piece of this that's shifting as we move forward too, is retaining some of the responsibility with the system, even in the event of something going wrong.
Well, with that, thank you again for being here on a snowy Washington, D.C. day, and I want to thank our panelists for an outstanding discussion. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Great job.